Okay, welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon's webinar. We'll be getting started in a moment. We'll just leave it a minute or so longer for anyone who might be still trying to join us. But welcome. My name's Danielle Sample. I'm Carbon Neutral Engagement Officer here at Nottingham City Council, and I'll be starting the webinar this afternoon. Okay, so we'll get started now. More people will join us as we continue. As I was saying, welcome to this afternoon's event. I hope you're all having a lovely day out there. It's rather grey out my window, but hopefully you're having a lovely day. As I said, my name's Danielle Sample. I'm the Carbon Neutral Engagement Officer at Nottingham City Council. And welcome to today, which is the first of a series of 5 webinars as part of our We Support CN28 series. Today's webinar is what does carbon neutral mean for local organisations? And the purpose of this webinar is to communicate what Carbon Neutral Nottingham 2028 is, what it means for yourselves as local organisations, and how you can get involved with that ambition further. So this is a Microsoft Teams live event. I understand some people are quite au fait with Microsoft Teams, some of you prefer Zoom. So if you are more familiar with other platforms, this is your first live event with Microsoft Teams. As you'll have noticed, your audio and video isn't enabled for this type of event due to the numbers attending. We've kept and set things up that way, but you'll be able to communicate with us throughout the webinar using the Q&A function. So if you look at the top menu bar on your window with the webinar in it, you'll see an icon like this just at the top. It might be a slightly different colour setup depending on your screen kind of setup. But if you click this, a side menu will open up and you'll be able to submit questions almost as though it's from a chat. So that will come through, and on those Q&A, those questions, those comments will be visible. And then what we're going to do at the end of today's session is review those questions, and we'll put those to our speakers at the end of the webinar. Unfortunately, we're unable to record this webinar due to some unforeseen technical issues that we're having today. But what we're going to do as an alternative is to share the slides and notes from the Q&A section, including responses to the questions following the event. And we'll do that to all people who are signed up as attendees for this event, regardless of whether or not they're able to attend. So our speakers today, beginning our webinar is Councillor Sally Longford, who's Councillor for Lenton and Wollaston East, and also the portfolio holder for Energy, Environment and Waste. She's going to be beginning today with an introduction and overview of Carbon Neutral Nottingham 2028 and updating you on progress so far. And then Sally's going to be handing over to Chris Cobban, our Carbon Neutral Policy Manager, and Chris is going to talk to us today about what does Carbon Neutral Nottingham 2028 mean for local organisations. So as I said, the aim of today's webinar is to communicate what CN28 is more clearly, and this is setting that foundation for how you can get involved. You're not going to have all questions answered at the end of this webinar. We'll be having more specific webinars in the series addressing more discrete issues where you'll be able to find out more information on the specifics. So that's all from me. What I'm going to do now is hand over to Councillor Sally Longford to begin.
Thank you, Danielle, and thank you everybody who's on the call today. It's really great to know that people are demonstrating their commitment by giving up their time to come along today and listen to this and participate. We want to be the first carbon neutral city in the country, and it's really important that we work together to achieve that, because it isn't just a council plan, it is a plan for the whole city. I have a fantastic team of officers at the council who are there to support me and everyone in the city who wants to do their bit, and two of them, a couple of them are on today, and you'll be hearing from Chris in a few minutes. I have the honour of declaring a climate and ecological emergency on behalf of the council, and since then we've been working together to help reach that goal. And it's really important that we continue to work together in partnership, and the We Support network is really important in that. Next slide, please. So we have a strategy to tackle climate change, and I declared the emergency in January 2020. We also brought forward our action plan at that point, which is on the website and very detailed, and gives you an idea of some of the things that have to happen in order for us to reach that goal. We had a period of public consultation and development, and it was changed significantly during that period, and particularly it increased the amount of references to the ecological side of the emergency. It's Nottingham's plan to reduce emissions, to protect the environment, to help mitigate climate change, but also to help people prepare for the effects of climate change, because we need to make the city more resilient so that people are not as badly affected as they could be. We all know that Nottingham, for example, is a hilly city, and areas of the city are prone to flooding, and so we need to work with people and other agencies to try and reduce that risk, as well as the risk of heating, which will affect people as time goes on. So we're going to be the first carbon neutral city in the country by 2028, and you have an important role to play in that. Next slide, please. So what is carbon neutral? It means that basically we do not release any carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. We are in balance with what we emit and what we use, and what we store. So the bath analogy is there. It shows how we can try and balance that carbon sink. By reducing our emissions, we're putting less into the sink, and by removing more carbon, we're taking carbon out of the sink. And Nottingham has chosen to focus particularly on carbon dioxide because it's the main cause of long-term global warming. But as time goes on, we'll be looking at some of the other major gases affecting climate change, including methane, for example, and we'll be starting to report on that in the near future. Next slide, please. So we have our charter and action plan, and it helps everyone to see what we need to do. It's on the website, all available for you to look at. So we must cut emissions, as the left-hand side of this slide shows. There are various ways of doing that. We need to tackle the amount of waste and how we deal with our waste, what we consume, how we transport ourselves and goods around the city, the way that we develop the city through the built environment, how we generate our own electricity and energy, and how we remove carbon from the system by increasing the storage in the system. So those are all the ways of helping to reduce and remove emissions. On the right hand side, we're looking at the resilience and adaptation, and increasing the natural stores. So for example, planting lots of trees and increasing the biodiversity of the area makes us all less vulnerable to climate change, and increases the capacity for our environment to cope better, and to protect people from the worst impacts. Next slide, please. So we as a city council have a role in leading this and monitoring how we're doing. And we have a great team of officers who are looking at the data and ensuring that we're on track and pointing out the issues that we need to tackle. But we can't do it alone because the council's only responsible for a very small percentage of the actual emissions. We have to do it in collaboration with other people. So, for example, the Nottingham Green Partnership is an organisation which meets regularly and has been doing for 30 years to try and tackle environmental issues in the city, and is very important partner organisation in making sure that we're monitoring what we're doing. And it includes major organisations in the city, some charitable organisations, voluntary sector, as well as the council. And also the We Support CM28 network, which is where you come in, which is a growing group of people and organisations who are really keen to participate and do their bit. We also have to engage with the public because everybody in the city has a role to play, and we have to communicate that and try and encourage people through things like the Green Rewards app, and hopefully shortly we'll be having a climate assembly which will engage different sections of the community and encourage people to play their part and to become more well informed about climate emergency. Next slide, please. So, our progress so far, we've made fantastic progress, and the data is only available up to 2020 because there's a time lag between when it happens and the data being collected. But so far, we've made a 49.9% reduction in our citywide emissions since 2005 and 57.7% reduction in per capita emissions, which is absolutely brilliant. However, as you can see, if we are to reach the goal of carbon neutrality by 2028, we've got a long way to go. The downward trajectory needs to speed up significantly if we are to make that progress. And this is obviously a challenge for everybody in the city. But we have to try and do our best to get there. And hopefully you can play your part in that. Next slide, please. So we've made a lot of progress, as I said. We are classed as an A-list city by the Carbon Disclosure Project, which looks at cities across the world, and we're in the top 12%. We've planted thousands of trees. Since 2019, we've planted 24,000 trees, and this year we've planted 9,000. We've got now our fleet, the council fleet, is 50% ultra low emissions vehicles, and we've got electric bin lorries, which alone, 8 of those alone save 200 tonnes of carbon a year. We've got lots of traffic calming and road closure schemes which help to reduce emissions and encourage people to walk or cycle, for example, to school. You'll have seen perhaps our school streets. And we've got 2 of the top 5 universities in the world for sustainability in the city. So Nottingham University and Nottingham Trent University are both very well respected organisations when it comes to their efforts to be sustainable. We've also been working hard with schemes to help people in their homes. So, for example, the least well insulated homes, 7,000 of those have been insulated, or they've had solar panels. Over the last few years, we've had 4,000 benefiting from solar panels, which obviously helps not only reduce emissions but also makes their home more acceptable and comfortable, and helps with health issues. So 46 local organisations have joined the We Support network, which is absolutely brilliant, and we hope that will continue to grow. And our University Hospital NHS Trust have launched their green plan to become net zero, and they've been working very hard, for example, to improve the sustainability of the city hospital site heating system, which was a bit of a nightmare, to be frank. And they've secured funding to change the windows at QMC to make those better, to reduce their carbon emissions. So there's lots of work happening in the city, and we're very proud of all that. Next slide, please. So I'll hand over now to Chris Common, who's going to go through what you can do to help and what it means to be carbon neutral. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Sally, for that. Quick introduction to myself. As Sally says, I'm the carbon neutral policy manager here at the City Council. So my role is to manage the team that oversee the delivery of the action plan that Sally mentioned, not only working with our own services within the council, but working with our partners across the city and everybody, if you like, in between, so residents as visitors, workers, etc. So my section really is just to give you a little bit more of an indication about what your role could be as one of our key local organisations. Next slide, please, Danielle. As we mentioned, this isn't just about what the council do. It can't be. It is genuinely a citywide effort to achieve carbon neutral 28. As the city can't really do it without yourselves. So everybody has a role to play, no matter how big or small the organisation or how big or small the contribution. Our local businesses and organisations are absolutely vital and important roles to the whole identity and vibrancy of the city. So as I say, we can't stress enough that the importance of everybody doing their bit, that what they can. Clearly, this isn't just about you as an organisation reducing the emissions you have from your operations, if you like, and the services that you provide, but you do have staff and you have customers and you have contractors and suppliers, and really it's about encouraging them as well to do their bit and make some positive changes. You know, some of the biggest employers in the city are part of either our green partnership or we support, and so there are thousands of people that can be influenced by the behaviour of a few people to hopefully then change what they can do either in their work life or in their personal life. Next slide, please. So as we mentioned, the overall emissions in the city have decreased by over 50 or nearly 50% in the last 15 years. So we're clearly on a good downward trajectory. But looking a little bit more in detail at how those emissions are split, this little pie chart shows you the split across a variety of themes. And for what I'd ask you really to focus on there is the orange quadrant. So this is the contribution to greenhouse gas emissions from industry and commercial buildings. So you can see a large proportion of the emissions that come out of the city result from the use of our buildings. Transport is also a large section, but the biggest by far the biggest section is the dark blue section on the left. Nearly 50% of the emissions of the city are imported. So what we're saying there, these are embedded in the goods and services that we buy, we procure, and we bring into the city to either consume ourselves as food or as services and goods as part of manufacturing processes. So that's clearly an area where we can make a lot of difference by understanding where that carbon is coming from. Next slide, please. You've probably heard of the different terminology involved in this, and terminology is always going to be a part of these big processes, but we refer to carbon emissions by either scope 1, 2 or 3, and scope 1 and 2 are those emissions that are owned or controlled by the company. So these are the direct emissions, if you like. So these are the direct emissions from the combustion of fuel. So these are the things that this is the carbon dioxide that results from us driving our cars or manufacturing. And scope 2 are the emissions we get from energy. So for instance, if we plug ourselves into the mains, a proportion of it comes from renewable sources, but at the moment the majority comes from the burning of fossil fuels. And finally, the scope 3, as I mentioned, that's the blue, if you like, on that diagram, hopefully you can see it, that's the indirect, other indirect emissions that are embedded within the goods and services that we produce, we procure and use. So that means that there are different ways that you can target the different scopes, and depending on really where you are in the carbon reduction journey, or where your company or organization's carbon footprint is the largest. So that leads me on to the next slide, Danielle. So really the first step on your journey, and it's like anything else, it's the first step on any strategy or any progress that you want to make, is you've got to understand where you're starting from. And what we recommend for companies and organizations is to understand your carbon footprint. So really it's about where are those emissions coming from within the way that your business operates. It will probably be very similar to the city's breakdown of emissions, but it can be quite different in some cases. But so really what it allows you to do is consider what the physical and behavioural changes that need to happen that can lead to those emissions reductions. It could be in the world of transport, it could be the building that you occupy, but you need to do the footprint, if you like, to start with, to see where you are, depending on where you are in the journey. Some of you may have already done this, but it's certainly something that's essential for you to know what's happening. So as I mentioned, and probably just paraphrasing a little bit, most emissions will come from the buildings. We tend to live and work in leaky old buildings where the cooling and energy efficiency is quite low, and the insulation is quite poor. But some of you may be in rental buildings where you haven't got necessarily the control over the fabric of the building, but that you can take that into account as you understand your own particular position. Transport roughly results in best part of 15% of the emissions in the city. It's one of the biggest sources of emissions. So we need to tackle how we move around the city, what vehicles we use to travel around the city, and in the case of organisations, how are your staff and how are your businesses moving around to do the business that you need to do? And that also includes your customers as well as your staff commuting and travelling around to get to your services. As I say, that embodied. I've done that twice now. The embodied carbon that results from goods and services, really it gives you the opportunity to look at how that's procured. Where are you getting it from? What is the manufacturing process for those? Are there alternatives, more sustainable alternatives that are possible? And I appreciate there's always cost involved with these, so that has to be balanced out. But essentially, looking at ways to reduce the amount of carbon that you're bringing in by buying the things you need to do for your services. And as Danielle says, we've got a range of webinars coming up after this one that will give you some more specific details about these particular aspects as well. So hopefully some of you are signed up to attend those as well. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the carbon footprint, understanding the carbon footprint is certainly a good starting point. And what we've got on this particular slide is an example from ourselves at the City Council. We have undertaken a carbon footprint, so we can start to unpick where those biggest challenges will be. And again, I think I'll start with the blue circle, and that shows that's the embedded carbon. That's where the 52% of the City Council's footprint and carbon dioxide emissions come from the things that we're buying in as an organisation. The green quadrant is all around our fleet and our business travel and our transport related activities. 13% comes from that side. I'm not doing my maths very well, but best part of 20%. Our waste generates 6%, and the energy that we use, whether it's gas, electricity, our district heating network, comprise the rest. The other 15, best part of 20%, another 20%. So this is allowing us to understand what we can do. We can look at our employee commuting, and we're doing all sorts of work with that. We're looking at ways of reducing our emissions coming from waste, so reducing the portion of waste sent to landfill, and we're looking at ways to increase the amount of renewable energy to reduce the reliance on fossil fuels in terms of gas and coal and others. But also our procurement processes. Can we buy more sustainably? Can we buy goods that have less embedded carbon? So as I say, that's a really good starting point. We've put a link up on there on that particular slide on the left hand side, which is a really excellent resource for SMEs to understand and start measuring their own carbon emissions. And next slide, please. So this final slide from me anyway is just to give you an example of some of the things that the resources that are out there. We've got plenty of information on our website, on the Carbon Neutral Nottingham 28 website, which we are revamping at the moment. So there's going to be quite a few improvements. There's a couple of schemes that are actually will be finished this summer from both universities, which are offers to small businesses to help them and advise them on improving their carbon footprints. We have a scheme within the council called ACE, which is the Accelerator Reduction in, ARC, which is the Accelerator Reduction in Carbon. But again, these are time limited schemes. So I would suggest if you are interested in getting in touch with us over those. As I mentioned, the SME Climate Club, the D2N2 have a growth hub, which also has some information on it, on the East Midlands Chamber, which some of you may already know, do some really sterling work and advice on carbon emissions and climate change. And I think that's me done. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So for those of you who didn't have a chance, as I said, we'll be circulating these slides, but if you follow that QR link that we showed on the previous slide, that will take you to a Padlet, kind of a web page where all the links to those schemes where you can find out further information. It's all centralised in that one place rather than us trying to cram that onto a slide, as kind of reinforce what Chris said as well, that some of these schemes are time limited. So I'd urge you, if you are interested, to get in touch with the relevant people as soon as possible on that. In addition to I suppose those resources, as we said, this is effectively a call to action for yourselves as local businesses in Nottingham. Those of you who are willing and wanting to get more involved in Carbon Neutral Nottingham 2028, there are two different routes that you can do that through. So you could join the Nottingham Green Partnership you can contact Chris via the email shown at the bottom of this slide if you wish to join that. That's a collective of lots of organisations within Nottingham, such as the universities, the Hospital Trust, and various small enterprises as well. Chris might be able to remind me how many people are in that partnership, but certainly if you'd be looking to kind of take a more active role and getting involved in that network, that would be brilliant. And you can also make your pledge to We Support CN28. So we've given these webinars the badge of We Support CN28 webinar series. Many of you who are watching today may not have made pledges to We Support already. Some of you may have, but if you'd be interested in making a pledge to We Support, again, get in touch with us via the email at the bottom of the page. I believe there is also a link to this directly via the QR in the previous slide that will follow this up. And what we're asking organisations to do there is to agree to our kind of outline pledge, and then you get to define your own carbon reduction actions that you will be looking to take to support Carbon Neutral Nottingham 2028. So I'll be able to send you further information on that. But as Sally said at the beginning, the more organisations we can get involved in that, the better. What you get back from that after making your pledge is support from ourselves to kind of communicate your actions. What we really want to do is shine a light on the fantastic things which local organisations are already doing to address the climate crisis that we're living with at the moment. So yeah, shout it loud from the ceiling. We want to really kind of promote what you guys are doing, and yeah, please do get in touch if you'd like to be part of that. So this, as I said, was the first webinar in our series of 5. And as I said at the beginning also, we may not have answered all your questions today. It's really great to be able to see a few questions popping up in the Q&A. Please do continue to add your questions. We'll be getting to those shortly. But next up in our series is on the 23rd of March, the webinar Beginning Your Carbon Reduction Journey. This is targeted mainly at organisations who are at the early stages in their carbon reduction journey. However, those of you who are a bit further along may find it useful to join in and kind of be reminded and refreshed of that process. We've got Caitlin from Nottingham Trent University Sustainability and Enterprise and Adam Pickering from Left Line joining us for that webinar. So they'll be able to talk about their own kind of expertise and their own experience of undertaking their carbon reduction actions, and Left Line is of course now carbon neutral, so we'll be able to learn lots of wonderful things from them. And then our webinar series continues until the end of June. The links that you're able to sign up to these webinars now, reserve your place via Eventbrite as you found this event, but we will be following up with future communications via social media if you need a reminder of those nearer the time. So that's enough from us. What we're really keen to do today is to hear your questions and respond to those. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to my colleague Benita, who is going to lead the Q&A element of the webinar this afternoon.
Thanks, Danielle. So let's kick off with a question. So we've had a question from Gary Morgan from Pixel Shrink Digital Impact. They ask, does the imported consumption category include digital emissions like those from a website? Chris, do you want to answer that one?
The answer is yes. So yes, these are essentially the things that we they're indirect emissions. So if you like, the power to use servers that generate the websites, etc., is all things that, if you like, will contribute to the scope 3, that embedded carbon, and it can be quite significant. And just as a little example for you, that every time you send an email, it roughly expends about 3 grams of carbon. So you think, well, that's not much, but on average, the world is sending, I think, best part of 2 to 3 billion emails a day. So you just do that. I can't really do the maths, but there's several tons of carbon being produced every day by just as sending emails. So, for example, when you receive an email, somebody's done something for you, you send one back that says thanks. You've just sort of added 3 grams of carbon by just saying thanks. So I think there is, it's a real, consideration to make, especially those companies that do rely very heavily on IT and servers. There is quite a bit of concern around the world as we've increased the capacity of our IT. There's huge energy demands from these server banks and server facilities. So the more that they can be producing energy or using sustainable energy, the better. But yes, is the answer. Long answer to a short question. Thanks, Benita.
Great. So we have got a question from Pat from Veggies/Green Festival/Sumac. They ask, almost half of Nottingham's emissions by source come from imported consumption. Well done on including this statistic, which other administrations might choose to ignore, along with aviation and shipping. To tackle this, are there ideas to encourage a change in the perception of consumerism, valuing quality of life rather than the purchasing of stuff?
So, as obviously the scope 3 emissions are much more complicated to get rid of than the rest of it, and the reason that cities don't pledge to get rid of it is because I can't stop Fred Bloggs getting a plane to Benidorm for their holidays any more than than I can stop things being manufactured in China and brought here. But there is a role certainly to play in educating people about the Scope 3 emissions that they're causing. And certainly I think it's a way that we as a council need to increasingly lead on, and I'm expecting that to start happening fairly soon, which will become apparent later. And I think a lot of our partner organisations also need to be thinking about it as well. We are hoping to run a climate assembly next year. We're currently looking at ways to raise money to do a proper demographically balanced climate assembly, which will involve a good sample of the population. And we're hoping that by doing that, we'll be able to reach out and explain to people more about their personal emissions and how people can contribute to reducing them. But absolutely, I think we need to promote more reuse and repair, and that's obviously something that I think is happening, very, very obviously happening in the city as we speak, because there are more places you can buy second hand. It's a much bigger market than it ever was, and it's become a respectable market, if you like, something that anybody will do, rather than just being something that people did because they couldn't afford to buy new. People are now considering vintage and second hand as a really important thing. So yes, I think absolutely it's something we need to pursue.
And just as add as well, Sally, is the one of the biggest contributors to embedded carbon, and bearing in mind the question coming from a food company, is food. We're doing an awful lot to try and encourage people to shall we say, eat less high carbon food. And we've done a lot of work in our schools. We got an award last year for in our scheme to introduce more vegetable choices within school menus. We're looking very closely at the menu choices within our own facilities, within the council's own catering facilities, and indeed we're looking to. It's a really important part of what we do in terms of ensuring that people are well educated and aware of the simple things like the choice of food, not necessarily just what it is, but where you get it from. And we've certainly seen over the last few days the issues of supply of things like tomatoes and salad stuff, which is out of season, and the reasons why they're having difficulties with the supply is down to adverse weather conditions in the south of Spain, which is as a result of climate change. So we can start to see the huge impact this is having on our food side supply chain. So it's a really, as Sally says, a really important thing for us to consider not only what we eat, but where we get things from, and whether we need to be buying as much as we do. Reduce the amount of for instance, like clothing. Can we do without as much? And we fully appreciate this has an impact on the economy, but we have to sort of look at ways that we can still have a vibrant economy, but one that's much more sustainable. Thank you.
Great. So next question submitted by Anonymous. We are a company based in the Nottingham city boundary and early adapters of supporting CN28. We have conducted our carbon scope 1, 2 and 3 and had it validated by Nottingham Trent University. But as our scope 1 and 2 is carbon neutral, we don't want to just claim being neutral. Is there a government body that gives a certificate or endorsement?
I'll take this one, Sally. There are. They are essentially commercial organisations that will do this. There isn't a sort of, if you like, a government body that will do this. One example off the top of my head is a company called Planet Mark, and Planet Mark will provide that endorsement and certification to show that your company has achieved certain level and certain standards, but there is usually a cost to this, and it depends on the level of intervention that you want and the level of support that they will give. But I think there are 2 or 3 others. I think there's one called Green Leaf or something like that. I did look at this the other day, but there's definitely one called Planet Mark, and I think what we'll do, Danielle, we'll put a couple of links to these companies, but they are commercial organizations. At the moment there isn't, if you like, a free version of it, but there is an ISO standard for sustainability, for example. So there are ways of getting official accreditation of your the work that's been done. For example, if you work in the events industry, there is an ISO that was developed after the London Olympics in 2012, and surprisingly enough, it's called ISO 2012, but it's all around sustainability of events. So again, that's another way of, it's like a kite mark for good practice in sustainability. But often these things cost because accreditation systems need validation and work done on them. So I'd just be slightly cautious that you have to pay for these. Like a Michelin star isn't free. You have to pay Michelin for the benefit of it. But we have been thinking about introducing a sort of a star system for things. But again, it's the management of it that we would have to consider very carefully to implement in the city, for example.
Great. And so next question from Terry Scott from Nottinghamshire Fire and Rescue. They ask, in 2028, will Nottingham be introducing a city centre ULEV zone? And if so, where will the boundary be drawn? Not sure who wants to take that one.
Sorry, a UL?
Yeah, so that's an ultra zero and ultra low emission vehicle.
Yeah, I don't know of any plans to do that. I meet regularly with the air quality strategy team, and there are no plans to. We were very fortunate when the government was taken to court by Client Earth with respect to nitrogen dioxide. In that, when they did the projections, we were found not to need to introduce a clean air zone, a chargeable clean air zone, because the city was projected to be within the international standard before the time limit. That's being continuously monitored, and we're still in the situation where if our emissions rose, our air quality deteriorated, we could be put into that position. But as yet, we're not. And I think it has been discussed that we should introduce a clean air zone which is not chargeable for most vehicles, but a very small area around the city centre to encourage all the vehicles to be ULEV, and to charge any vehicle that comes into the city centre, and I'm talking about the core area here around the Lace Market, the Old Market Square, that sort of area. There has been talk of making that a clean air zone, if you like, which would limit the access to vehicles which were not ULEV. But as I say, it is a very small area we're talking about. So would obviously encourage delivery vehicles, for example, and taxis which weren't compliant to either change or avoid coming to Nottingham city centre. But this plan was in the mix before COVID. And then with lockdown and all the chaos that caused, and the pressure on city centre businesses, it was decided that we couldn't justify implementing that, because frankly there wasn't very much traffic in the city centre. And at the moment we're in the position where we're waiting for government legislation to enable us to give us the opportunity to do that if we wish to do it. So I can't answer the question at the moment because we don't know.
Okay, thanks for that answer, Sally. So another question from Pat. They say, are CN28 able to provide support, perhaps through buddies from the academic community, in evaluating targets and progress in small organisations that do not have the skills or resources to conduct monitoring? Chris, that might be one for you.
Yeah, this is always something that we if you like, it would be an ambition for us to do, is to provide a level of service to our organisations and businesses that is, if you like, directly from the council. Problem we've got, we just don't have the resources to do this. We don't have the internal, we don't have armies of people that can do this because it's quite resource intensive. However, we do work very closely with the universities, and I think the question is around, you know, can we help with that? And we regularly have placements within our own team from both university student placements to work on particular projects. And I think there's probably some scope there, because the universities are always looking for sort of industry experience and industry, and there are some really strong and active academic courses at both universities around sustainability and environmental protection. And I think it's a really good idea. I think, you know, and we're doing lots more with our universities to help us with that. And really an example of it, which is, it is a shame, but obviously these things are time limited, but as Danielle mentioned, the Sustainability in Practice scheme from NTU was very well used. I think they've supported, I don't know in terms of numbers, I'm sure that those numbers will come up, but it's several companies have benefited from that support, and that is for free. But obviously these things can't last. But going forward, you know, we're certainly exploring ways of directly supporting our businesses and organisations, whether it's their charities or whatever they are. But again, it's resourcing that is our main sort of issue, if you like, because it could be quite resource intensive. But it's certainly an area we want to do more of. And I say, I'll just reiterate, check out some of those resources that we put on the previous slides. And say the SME hub has some free resources about doing perhaps some basic assessment of your footprint and your emissions. And then obviously if you want to go into a bit more detail, it might require a little bit more, but there's certainly things, if you're particularly interested, get in touch with us at the email address that was on the bottom of the slides. We'll see what we can do to help. But yeah, I like the idea of buddying up with the universities. As I say, we do work extremely closely with both universities in that respect.
Thanks, Chris. So another question from Alina Ruiz. They say, can any city join the network?
I suppose the answer is we are quite parochial, and we do tend to stick to the boundaries of Nottingham. We do work very closely with our core city colleagues. So some of you may be familiar with the expression core cities, but these are essentially the biggest cities, the big economic cities outside of London. So that includes Sheffield, Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds, etc. And we work very closely with our climate colleagues there. And I'm sure, and probably I would say 90% sure, that they will have something similar going off in their cities. And we also work very closely with our local neighbours, our district councils and the county council within Nottinghamshire, and even out beyond into Derbyshire as well. So whilst the Nottingham Green Partnership is a fairly exclusive club in terms of that it includes, we encourage people from Nottingham to be part of it, because that's what we're about. But I don't want to sound too harsh, but we do try to stick to people from Nottingham, but that doesn't mean to say we don't close our eyes, because we know there isn't a big glass bubble over Nottingham. We need to work with our nearest neighbours and beyond, and the whole country as well. As I say, we work through the LGA, which is the Local Government Association, and do a lot of work with them. So it's, as I say, it makes me sound as though it is exclusive, but it's exclusive to Nottingham, if you like, as much as anything.
Thanks, Chris. So we've had a question from Debbie Seaborn. Debbie asks, I'm working for CT4N, formerly Nottingham Community Transport. Some of our buses are electric. We're interested in running more electric vehicles to provide transport for community groups and individuals, but the capital cost is huge. 2 questions. Any helpful ideas to help with the capital cost? And we have a staff newsletter, and it would be great to include some information there for colleagues. Can you share any easy access, readable, short content? Who wants to take that one?
I'll answer the bit about the buses, I think. Certainly the bus companies have reduced their emissions. As you say, you've got some electric buses, and Nottingham City Transport has some gas buses and is converting some of the smaller buses to electric. I think what I would recommend is that you go through our transport team, who can advise about grant money that might be available to help you. They're the experts in this. Nobody on this call, I think, would be able to advise, but I think if you go through the transport team at the City Council, they're very adept at getting funding in, and they might have some ideas about where you could access funding to help you. I do realise that it's a big issue, but yeah, that's what I would recommend.
I think just adding on to that, the second part of the question about sharing information for your staff newsletter. We produce a monthly newsletter called CN28, surprisingly enough, and it goes out on the 28th, surprisingly enough, with all sorts of information in there. And I think, and I know there's colleagues, Danielle and Benita on the call, we all helped contribute to that with our communications officer. So I think there's all sorts of information that we're more than welcome to, be more than willing to share for other people to share within their own newsletters and things. So I think what we'll do again, Danielle, if it's okay, is that we can provide some more information about our communication side of things, because as I say, as we said earlier in the slides presentation today, communicating the issues and the awareness is absolutely key to what we want to achieve, so people can understand why they need to do things, let alone try and do them as well. So there's lots of support there. Check out the website. As I say, we are improving it more to get it a bit more newsy and a bit more up to date. But yeah, there's lots of resources to share, and feel free to use them as and when you need them. But Sally, you're absolutely right about the buses. I think our transport colleagues are definitely the place for more information on possible grants and things. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you're trying to encourage your employees to be more to reduce their own carbon emissions, the Green Rewards app is really good and gives people an easily accessible set of actions that they can do that will help inform them and also reduce their emissions. And there are, there's freebies available for people that show that they're making an effort. So I think it's something that I would definitely recommend that you point your employees to. I think that would be really good, and it's in collaboration with all the districts around Nottingham. So the likelihood is that your employees will probably be able to access it as residents of Broxtowe or Rushcliffe or wherever they might live, even if they don't live in the city.
Thank you for that, Sally. That brings us to the end of our Q&A session, so I'll hand back to Danielle to finish us off.
Thank you very much, Benita, and thank you again to Chris and to Sally for their time today, and thank you to all of you wherever you are in Nottingham attending today. As I said, apologies that there were some technical difficulties there with the camera and such what, but we will follow up with presentation slides and responses to the questions following on for this, if you would like to kind of refer back to those, including any kind of suggested links or contacts that we've kind of mentioned here today. As a reminder, the next webinar in our series is on the 23rd of March. We'll also include a link directly to booking onto that should you wish, in our follow-up information for you. But otherwise, thank you very much for attending, and we'll see you all next time. Thank you very much.